Hello everyone, welcome back to another mini album reviews video. This is the 7th one so far in 2026, and stay tuned for hopefully some individual album reviews coming up. There's a few that I want to do, some of which will be a little bit different than what I usually do, but stay tuned for that. Anyway, right now I got 10 albums to talk about. These ones are very, very brief. I have had quite a bit going on the past couple of weeks in real life, and I don't want to spend too much time on this YouTube channel. As much as I do want to be uploading more on this channel, I don't want to sacrifice living my life just to do this. And I do have like school and work and lots of stuff. So yeah, these reviews are not super in-depth, but I still wanted to talk about these 10 albums, some of which I like better than others, but it's all just my personal opinion at the end of the day. There were definitely some pleasant surprises in this one, though. So anyway, let's get started with... Alright, so I've heard of Courtney Marie Andrews, although this is my first time listening to one of her albums as far as I can remember. And this seems to be getting a decent amount of attention, too. And yeah, you know what? I think it's pretty solid. It's a nice, mostly mellow Americana album with some pretty good production and atmosphere, which can evoke some emotional vibes and sometimes nostalgia for me in its sound. And there's some good writing too, like how Outsider could be read as either heartbreaking or just plain self-confident, depending on how literally it's taken. And I appreciate how Best Friend takes the typical cliche of wanting a relationship, but instead makes it about wanting a best friend. And there's some catchier moments here, like Everyone Wants to Feel Like You Do, with its really good melodies and the energy and the instrumentation, and Keeper is a really good folk rocker. But I don't know, maybe it just reminds me too much of so much else like this that I've heard, and as a result, I'm just not that impressed. Or maybe I just wish the best songs stood out a bit more in the grander scheme of things. I don't know, it's not fully clicking. I do not think this is bad by any means, but I wish I liked it more. Still a 7 out of 10, and I think it's probably worth a shot. So here's this critically acclaimed sophomore album by this UK band formed a decade ago, and it follows their 2023 album, which I was not aware of until this came out. So as an introduction to the band, well, this is certainly a punishing listen to say the least, and it's quite unique to me in a lot of ways. The best way I can describe it and how it fits into electro-industrial and noise rock and other kinds of experimental music is... well, I'd say think the grooviness of Model Actress with the haunting subtleties of Shoo Shoo, and sometimes some production styles and the poppier elements of this album that feel very hyperpop-esque. Maybe a bit like an artist such as Underscores, as well as the haunting distortion and crushing drums in the vein of Daughters, as well as experimentation that kind of reminds me of Injury Reserve and By Storm. And that's URGH by Mandy, Indiana for you. Now, I'm not sure exactly who all their influences were, but regardless, they make this their own, putting it all together in a smooth yet harshly bleak way. And it makes sense for this album, full of commentary on the horrifying state of the world, along with personal demons and an endless battle against them, and how hauntingly bleak that can become. But also it manages to not be too overly depressing by trying to find catharsis along the journey through such strong instrumentation and production that actually backs it up and makes this hit really hard. And oh, guess what? There's a great Billy Woods feature as well. Now, most of the lyrics are in French, so it is hard for me to fully analyze them as well as I'd like to beyond the general vibes I got from them. But I do want to highlight the closing track in English, which I think is exactly the kind of song we need right now, considering all the rich, powerful men who have managed to avoid consequences for their horrible actions, which is what this song is about. And if I haven't made it clear already, I really like this album. Definitely an intriguing and powerful listen that will likely stay in my rotation. 8 out of 10 for me. This is great. This is my first time listening to an album from this Australian prog rock band, and I saw they've gotten quite a bit of acclaim, including for this new album. And okay, it's not really for me, but I can still recognize some things it does well. I like the groovy instrumental of Drone. Conversations had some nice commentary on the back and forth in one's mind between dwelling on the past and moving forward. And I like how the following track, Reanimation, seems to be regretting all that excess focus on the past. And Remote Self-Control has some impressive drumming, as do some other tracks here as well. Although on this song, it seems to all come together more as a pretty good song. But look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. This basically feels like a Deftones album that's just a bit less heavy and not as atmospheric. And honestly, as someone who's not even a big Deftones fan, that's not a good sign coming from me. And as someone who's not super familiar with a lot of this kind of alt metal, or whatever you want to call it, there's probably way better comparisons than Deftones, but it's how I personally hear it. I think there's some worthwhile commentary on this album, although the lyrics don't feel particularly clever or unique most of the time, and as much as it's mostly well performed, it just doesn't warrant much replay value for me. Oh, and the production can be very hit or miss, with a lot of these mixes feeling quite hollow. So yeah, 6 out of 10, not really for me, not particularly bad either. This is the long-anticipated debut studio album from Hemlock Springs, an artist who's been getting quite a bit of critical acclaim for individual singles over the past few years, as well as her 2023 debut EP, Going Going Gone, which included a song I put on my year-end favorite songs list for that year on my blog, back when I did top 100 songs instead of top 50. But that list, as well as the same one for 2022, was largely made up of filler that I tried to convince myself I really loved in order to complete a full top 100 list. Part of the reason I switched to just doing a top 50. In retrospect, there were other better songs that I didn't even put in my top 100 those years, rather than a bunch of the stuff scattered throughout the lists. But whatever, here's this new debut album from Hemlock Springs, which I was still pretty interested in hearing, and it did not disappoint. Because this is a really fun synthpop album full of so much personality, catchy melodies, pure ear candy, and some interesting storytelling too, which can get subtly emotional at points too. Look at WWWWW, for example, which shows her questioning how somebody ended up in an abusive relationship and wishes for that person to escape it by talking about how shitty their partner is, and how she could never be able to love him herself, so she wonders why this other person can, and it's honestly a pretty heartbreaking song when you really look into it. And Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Ankles was inspired by a nightmare she had where she's being attacked and no one's helping. And yet, don't get me wrong, this album is still a ton of fun. The more thoughtful, serious elements only make it better. Because to me, the emphasis is more just on how catchy and fun and melodic this is, as well as the brilliant production. That latter song I just mentioned reminds me so much of Marina in the best ways possible, especially her early stuff. And there are so many strong hooks here on songs like that one, The Beginning of the End, WWWWW, Sever the Blight, and Sense Is. And I also think this album ends really well with a song that shows her moving on from a past version of herself and embraces the future, with some beautiful production that keeps this song groovy but not overly dancey, at least not in the wrong ways. And it's an absolutely terrific closing track that also happens to have an awesome key change. And I really like her unique vocal timbre, and she absolutely brings a lot of personality to these songs. That said, there are a couple moments where the vocal style doesn't really fit for me, like the opener and Sever the Blight, but they're few and far between. Overall, this is a really fun synth-pop album that could arguably be described as bubblegum pop, and probably some of the best of it that you'll hear this year. To fans of Magdalena Bay, if you haven't heard this, please give it a chance. I think you'll love it. And I'll admit, I'm not sure yet if this is really amazing or if it's merely just great. Well, I guess we'll have to see. But either way, it's an 8 out of 10 and a very welcome surprise early in the year. In fact, I'm not even sure I should be surprised. But I'm really enjoying this album, and if this is just her debut, we might have to pay close attention to whatever she does next. She might have a masterpiece of an album in her. I guess we'll have to wait and see. So here's a new death metal album by this Brazilian band formed at the start of this decade, and it's their second studio album thus far, following up their mostly acclaimed 2023 debut Leprous Daylight, which I have not listened to, and I decided to just go into this new album because I saw it getting a decent amount of acclaim as well. And I'm just realizing now, why am I listening to and reviewing so much death metal this year, considering it's not really a genre I like all that much? I mean, I know this album's getting a lot of acclaim, but still, I should maybe prioritize stuff I think I'll like a lot more. But whatever, I decided to give this a couple listens, and on the Bandcamp page, it describes this as a summoning of despair that drags the listener into a chasm where brutality and anguish entwine. And yeah, it seems to be just that. Lyrically, it's very haunting, even though I don't fully understand all the meanings of everything. I also think the main point is that it's a very punishing album for the listener. And honestly, I can get behind this kind of thing, but it's not really for me, and again, it's the same reasons a lot of death metal isn't for me. It just feels like a typical death metal album, which isn't a genre I particularly like, and then sometimes the mixing can get kind of awkward, like on the song Servo. I do love the horrifying tension, though, in the beginning of Scalded by His Sacred Halo, with those guitars that just repeat over and over again and are very haunting. And then the song just builds and builds and evolves from there without sacrificing any of its pure musical terror. Well, until that mellower section toward the end, but then it picks up again with some punishing shots of drums with those electrifying guitars. It's a legitimately great track which I'll probably continue to listen to. That's a big surprise! But outside of that, and a few other moments with some really crisp drum timbres and production where the instrumentation can be quite hard-hitting, look, I just don't think it's that special to my ears. Death metal fans might disagree with me, but I'm gonna have to give this a 6 out of 10. I mean, what else do you expect from me at this point? So here's a Danish black metal band I'd never heard of until now, and I saw this album getting a decent amount of acclaim online. And after hearing it, it's not hard to see why this has been getting some Deafheaven comparisons, because their influence is very clear here, especially in the vocals. I'd be pretty surprised if this band are not Deafheaven fans. Now, I have complicated opinions on Deafheaven, but that's not the point. I wanted to give this a fair shot as its own album, and it's a little over 40 minutes with a lot of dreamy passages, as well as heavy black metal with screamed vocals, and lyrics in both English and Danish. And it seems to be about trying to claw oneself out of a seemingly endless pain and depression, where the writing feels a bit cliché at points, but doesn't totally fall flat on its face either. Now, unfortunately, though, I just don't find this as hard-hitting as I'd like, and part of it has to do with the production, which often has a weird tendency to not really pair the vocals well with the instrumentation, or something feels really awkward about the texture, and sometimes it can extend to other instruments like on HUD, the fourth song here. Also, why do parts of the closing track sound like MGK attempting shoegaze? But still, there are some good melodic guitar riffs, the vocals themselves are pretty strong, if not all that unique, and this does bring some decent atmosphere, but I just wish it all came together a bit more into a fully great project. So I'll give it a fairly light 6 out of 10. It's not bad by any means, but it is underwhelming if you set your expectations too high, so yeah, make of that what you will. So this is an album I discovered online, which has been getting a decent amount of acclaim so far, and I saw it described as both classical and minimalism, the latter of which I vaguely remember from my days of studying music in college a few years ago. My basic understanding of minimalism is that it involves a lot of repetition that eventually changes, albeit slowly and one thing at a time. Probably not the textbook definitions, but it's something along those lines. And here we got some compositions by, I hope I pronounced these names correctly, Steve Reich and Charlemagne Palestine, neither of whom I know anything about, and it's performed by Eric Hall, whom I also know nothing about. But I decided to give it a shot, as I've been wanting to try and explore different styles of music that are outside the usual genres I review, and honestly, this is really good. It's got a lot of slow builds and great ambient textures that make this feel both calming and tense at the same time, which is a difficult juxtaposition to pull off well. And it feels so carefully crafted and delicate in a way that evokes a lot of admiration from an artistic standpoint, which only makes the listening experience even more satisfying. All that being said though, I do kind of wish the closing track hadn't started so intense and maybe let itself get to that point through a slow build. And I don't think all of the repetition on this album is to its benefit. Still, for an instrumental, artsy listen that requires your full attention, it's quite impressive. This definitely evoked some nostalgia through its sound alone, dare I even say meaning. Strong 7 out of 10, I doubt I'll be going back to it much, but it was definitely a very enjoyable listen that hit the spot. So here's a debut album from this Canadian digital hardcore duo I'd never heard of before, and I saw it getting quite a bit of critical acclaim, so I thought, why not check it out? This style of music isn't usually my thing, so I didn't have super high expectations, but like I just said in that last review, I'm trying to listen to more music outside of my comfort zone this year. So I gave this a couple listens, and I can respect how they do this sound on the album, where they absolutely don't shy away from fully going all in on this style, with some very relentless experimentation, and unfortunately I think it's mostly to the album's detriment. Right from the opening track, I was kind of scratching my head at this, even though I mostly like the production on that song. There's just some really odd lyrics like, I take what I want, I'm a pig, I'm a creep, and then following it up pretty quickly on that verse with, I hope one day I get to die in my sleep. And I realized pretty quickly by about song 3, Sick of It, which also has some odd lines like, I pride myself on missing forest for the trees, that this was one of those albums. The ones where it's built on quirkiness and seemingly a forced attempt at being unique or shocking the listener. I mean, just look at the bad rhymes, underwritten passages, weird glitchy noises, and shocking sounds all over this album. So yeah, I don't feel like trying to do more of a deep dive on this album because after 2 full listens, I just decided I'd had enough. I should acknowledge the album title's reference to a movie of the same name, which I've never seen, but I looked it up and it turns out it's a film about a serial killer being filmed for a documentary, and the people making the documentary eventually become really intrigued and become accomplices. And Noel Mansbridge, the lead singer of Femtanyl, said this album is about a man she knows. Now I have a lot of questions. But I do think there's some commentary here about the way violence is often turned into entertainment, and while I don't think the execution is very good and often does a really bad job of satire, there might be more to this that I'm missing. But what I can say for certain is that I don't like it. Strong 4 out of 10. I don't think this is worth the hype. Alright, I don't know how long each of these individual reviews are, but I think I'm going to keep this one especially brief because it doesn't really give me a whole lot to say, and also because I'm trying to get all these reviews out in a reasonable amount of time. But that's absolutely not a bad thing about the album by any means. It's just a really goddamn solid pop-punk album from this band whose name I'd heard a lot before but haven't listened to much, if at all. And yet maybe I should, because I was immediately gripped by the constant good melodies in both the vocals and the guitars, and also how rock solid the production is. And the album's only 19 minutes, taking a bunch of stories, both happy and sad, and sometimes somewhere in between, and finds a way to make these fun little jingle-like tunes out of it, which might sound kind of unappealing. Honestly, even to me it would, as someone who doesn't usually like radio jingles. I'm not saying this album is full of radio jingles, I'm just saying it kind of has those vibes sometimes. But I don't know, for some reason here it just works. Maybe because they're actually well written melodically and compositionally, and the instrumentation and production can back them up. And lead singer Barry Johnson does a phenomenal job here of making these songs really hit, both emotionally and as fun little pop-punk tunes, which honestly is a big part of the reason it feels like this packs so much into a short running time. Again, the album's under 20 minutes, and yet it feels way longer, and that's absolutely a great thing. So yeah, it's an 8 out of 10 for me, and even though it might feel a bit more like an EP, despite having 9 songs, it's absolutely worth hearing. Maybe even more so considering it won't take up much of your time. And maybe I should check out more of their other stuff because I really ended up liking this a lot more than I thought I would. Alright, here's the debut album from this indie rock group from Manchester, and it's only a little over 40 minutes. So I was like, you know what, why not give this a shot? And there's definitely some post-punk elements on here with the way the guitar and drums go together, and some clear influence from post-punk bands, some parts of this kind of reminding me of early Black Country New Road. It's just a shame that this isn't really doing much for me. A lot of it feels pretty basic for this style of music, and I often wish the drums were punchier. Lyrically, there is some interesting stuff that feels quite open to interpretation, and also some fairly strong commentary on Up the Antelope about people who want the truth silenced. And that song has some pretty strong guitar work as well. And I like the vibes of the opener with its very haunting vocal effect, and Night Owl is pretty groovy, and I like the idea of a seemingly metaphorical night owl which could represent any of a number of things, but is something we all succumb to. Probably the best song here. But even the best moments are far from exceptional, and I don't think I'll be going back to this much. As a result, it's a strong 6 out of 10. They might be a band to watch, and I do see potential here, but this isn't clicking. Alright, thank you all so much for watching. Please feel free to let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of these albums and or what you thought of my video. Again, it's all just my opinion on these albums. And I'm noticing I'm now at over 60 album reviews for this year so far. If I've counted correctly, it's 66 album reviews that I've finished. Now, all but one of them have been in mini review videos, but still, I'm actually quite impressed that I've been able to do that many, considering we're not even 2 months into the year so far. But anyway, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of this video, and oh yeah, like I said at the start of this video, I'm hoping to have some individual reviews out soon. Like I said, there's something a little bit different about some of them. Stay tuned to find out why. That is, if I'm able to get those all published soon, which I'm hoping I am. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I will hopefully be back with more videos very soon. And yeah, I guess time for me to start working on those. I'm going to go work on one of the individual album reviews right now. So yeah, thank you again. I will see you all later.